The first thing my wife did in that apartment was tell me not to unpack my coats. Not the dishes, not the coffee maker, not the box with the bathroom towels written in black marker on the side. My coats. Leave those for now, Eleanor said, standing by the front door with a roll of paper towels tucked under one arm. We need to see what works in here. I was still holding one of the hangers from the old place, my brown fall jacket hooked over my wrist, and I remember looking at the empty wall where I'd already pictured a row of pegs by the door. Instead, there was a brass key rack screwed into the plaster, old-looking, polished at the edges by years of hands I hadn't known about. It didn't match anything else in the apartment. Not the brushed nickel knobs in the kitchen, not the cheap beige light switch plates, not the narrow black mailbox key sitting on the counter beside the pizza coupons they'd left for new tenants. I thought I'd hang them here, I said. She didn't even turn around. Not there. That was a small thing. Small enough that, in a better marriage, it would have passed for taste. So I set the coats back on the arm of the couch we hadn't decided to keep and told myself the same thing I'd been telling myself for a year and a half. New place. New start. Don't make a problem out of every sharp corner. The apartment itself sat on the third floor of a brick building west of downtown Columbus. One of those older complexes from the late 70s with narrow hallways, tan carpet in the corridors, and metal railings that always felt cold even in spring. The movers had left the night before. We'd eaten take-out Chinese off paper plates with our knees touching the edge of a taped-up box marked kitchen, and Eleanor had said, "Maybe this will be better for us." Not warmly, not tenderly, just like a person talking about weather that might or might not hold. I had taken that and called it hope. The next morning I woke to gray light leaking through the cheap vinyl blinds and the smell of cardboard, dust, and that faint, sweet chemical smell, new paint leaves behind, even after the walls looked dry. My back hurt from the mattress being too low on the frame. Somewhere outside, a bus sighed at the curb and pulled off again. In the kitchen, cabinet doors clicked open and shut. When I came out, Eleanor was already barefoot on the linoleum, hair tied back, moving around the place like she'd spent a winter there once and had only stepped out for milk. That was the second thing. She tugged open the left kitchen drawer halfway, gave it a quick lift, and it slid free on its warped track. She crossed the narrow hole and shouldered the bathroom window down with exactly the right pressure, the way you do only after you've fought the thing before. Then she stepped around the loose board near the bedroom threshold without looking down. I stopped with a coffee tin in my hand. "You okay?" she asked. I looked at the floorboard, then at her. "Did Louise tell you about that board?" "About what?" "The one by the bedroom." She followed my eyes and gave a little shrug. "Old buildings creak, Cal." That was true enough, but she hadn't stepped on it. I set the coffee on the counter and went back to opening boxes. Home Depot cardboard, black marker. Dishes, linens, books. My life at 71, packed into square brown containers with handholds. There is something humbling about that no one mentions when they tell you a move can be a fresh start. At your age, a fresh start mostly looks like kneeling on someone else's floor cutting tape with a steak knife, because you can't remember which box holds the scissors. "Where do you want the mugs?" I asked. "Top shelf, left of the stove." I looked up. "You already checked?" "They're the obvious shelves." Maybe they were. Maybe I was tired. Maybe I wanted the answer badly enough that I let it sit. Around 10, there was a knock at the door. Not loud. 2 quick raps. I started toward it, but Eleanor got there first. She opened it just enough to slip her face into the gap, then angled her body so I couldn't see who stood outside. I heard a man's voice, low and businesslike. "Just making sure you got the extra fob," he said. "We're fine," Eleanor answered. She kept the door half closed. Not slammed in my face, not rude, just held. By the time she stepped back, there was a plastic fob in her hand and a laminated key tag swinging from it. I reached for it out of habit, the way a husband reaches for a thing in his own home, but she had already hung it on the brass rack by the door. I saw the label before it stopped moving. A. Mercer, not Mercer, not apartment 3B, not both our names. Just hers. I stood there, looking at it long enough that she noticed. "What?" she said. "Why has it got your name on it?" "Probably because I'm the one who answered the door." "That your idea or his?" She turned back to the counter and began unwrapping newspaper from a stack of plates. "It's a key tag, Calvin." Maybe that was the third thing. Not the tag itself, the tone. The way she said it like I was already too tired, too old, too thin-skinned to be worth a straight answer. I carried 2 boxes into the spare room just to have something to do with my hands. Mine, mostly. Winter sweaters. Tax folders. The framed picture of me and my brother at a Reds game in 1989. When I came back, Eleanor had started on the bookshelves. Her hardcovers were already standing upright in neat rows. My boxes were still sealed. "Want me to open these?" I asked, touching one of the boxes with her novels in it. "No, I've got them." I nodded toward the stack by the sofa. "You want me to get into mine?" She didn't look over. "Not yet. I don't know if all of that's going to fit." All of that. I stood there with my hand on the box cutter and let that land. She didn't mean it cruelly, not in the obvious way. That was part of the trouble with Eleanor. She could make a man feel pushed to the edge of the room without ever raising her voice enough for anybody else to call it a shove. By noon, we had half a kitchen and 1 made bed. I went downstairs to bring up the mail from the cluster boxes by the lobby. The building smelled like old carpet glue and somebody's laundry soap. A maintenance man in a navy work shirt was tightening a loose screw on the call box. "You settled in okay?" he asked, trying to be. He glanced up the stairs toward our floor and smiled in a way I couldn't read. "Miss Mercer seems to know the place already." I looked at him. "What do you mean?" His wrench stopped in his hand. "Nothing, just. She asked about the old window latch on 3 before I even got up there. Thought maybe the office told her." I stood with the mail in my hand and felt something shift just a little. "What office?" He shrugged, too fast now. "Leasing office. Could have been that." Luis Ortega. I just reached the landing again when my phone rang. Unknown number. Columbus area code. I almost let it go. Then I answered. "Mr. Mercer." "Yes. This is Martin Kessler. I'm the former owner of that unit." There was a scrape of chair legs on the other end, like he'd stood up while talking. His voice was older than mine by a few years. Maybe. Dry and tight in the throat. "I need you to come see something," he said. I shifted the mail to my other hand. "If this is about leftover property, you can tell my wife." "No." The word came out fast enough to stop me. "Not your wife. You." I looked toward the apartment door. It was cracked open 3 inches. Through the gap I could hear cupboard doors, the soft thud of dishes. "What is this about?" I asked. A pause. Then, very carefully. "I had a camera in the living room when the place was vacant. Couple break-ins in the building last winter. I forgot to disable the feed before the lease started. I should have. That part's on me." "All right," I said slowly. "I checked it yesterday." Something in the way he said yesterday made the back of my neck go cool. And I think you need to watch it before you ask your wife another question in that apartment." I tightened my grip on the envelopes hard enough to bend the corners. "Why?" Another pause. I could hear him breathing. "Because if I tell you over the phone, you'll either think I'm crazy or think I'm trying to start trouble," he said. "And because whatever your wife told you about that apartment, it wasn't enough." My mouth went dry. "She used to live there, didn't she?" I said. He was quiet long enough that I knew I had hit something true. "Come alone," he said, "please. There's a coffee shop on Tremont. 2:00. I looked through the crack in the door again. Eleanor was at the far counter with her back to me, one hand braced on the edge, the other resting flat against the wall beside the refrigerator, as if she were listening through it. When I walked in, she straightened and turned. "Who was that?" she asked. I looked at her hand, then at her face. "Wrong number," I said. At 2:00, I sat across from Martin Kessler in a coffee shop that smelled like burnt espresso and cinnamon syrup. He was wearing a tan windbreaker zipped too high and had one of those folded newspaper faces older men get when regret has dried in the lines. He slid a tablet across the table without touching my hand. "I'm not proud of this," he said. "Shouldn't have had the camera on after move-in." But once I saw her, I didn't know what else to do. On the screen was our living room. Empty. No furniture yet except the lamp the leasing office had left in the corner for showings. Late afternoon light across the carpet. Then Eleanor came into frame, not sneaking, not hurrying, just walking in like a woman returning to a room that had once watched her cry. She stood in the center of it for a long time. Too long. One hand at her throat, eyes fixed on the corner near the window. Then her mouth began moving. I leaned closer. "Is there sound?" Martin shook his head. Camera never had audio. On the screen, Eleanor nodded once, like someone had answered her. Then she turned toward the front door, unlocked it, and pulled it open wide. The hallway beyond was empty. She stepped back as if making room for someone to enter. I felt my stomach go hollow. The footage skipped ahead a few minutes. She was on her knees now by the baseboard, fingers moving over the plaster seam beside the old radiator pipe. Her head tilted, listening again. When she rose, the lamp behind her threw her shadow long across the floor. Only the shadow lifted its arm a beat too late. I stared at the screen until my own reflection floated faintly over hers. "Could be the light," I said. But the words came out thin. Martin didn't argue. The video rolled on. Eleanor stood in the middle of that empty room like a person waiting for permission. Not frightened, not nostalgic, not even sad in any ordinary way I knew. It looked like recognition, worse than cheating, worse than a secret lunch or a hotel receipt in a coat pocket. This was the face of somebody stepping back into a life that still belonged to her more than the one she'd brought me into. By the time the clip ended, my coffee had gone cold between my hands. Martin watched me for a moment, then said quietly, "That isn't nerves, Mr. Mercer." I looked down at the paused frame of my wife in an empty living room that, all at once, did not look empty at all. No, it wasn't nerves. And it sure as hell wasn't nostalgia. I did not sleep much that night. Not because I was afraid of the apartment. I am too old to scare easy over shadows and angles. It was Eleanor I lay awake listening to. The soft turn of bedsheets. The pause in her breathing when she thought I was asleep. The careful way she got up once around 3 and stood in the doorway of the bedroom long enough for me to know she was looking out toward the living room. I kept my eyes shut. In the morning I found my shaving kit on the bathroom sink already unpacked, toothbrush in the cup, razor beside it, pills lined up in a little ceramic dish I had never seen before. I stood there looking at it. Eleanor was in the kitchen stirring instant oatmeal in one of our good mugs. "I didn't ask you to unpack this," I said. She glanced over, then back down at the spoon. "You were hunting through boxes last night. That's not the point. It's a toothbrush and blood pressure medicine, Calvin, not state secrets." She said it mildly, almost kindly. That was the part that got under my skin. The arrangement itself looked less like care than management, like somebody setting out what an old man would need to keep from becoming trouble. I went back into the bedroom and saw that my 2 boxes of books had been slid from beside the dresser into the spare room. Not opened, just moved. Her side of the closet was full now. Mine still held 3 shirts, 2 pairs of pants, and the same brown fall jacket I had tried to hang by the door. When I carried the boxes back out, Eleanor looked up from the table. "Leave those," she said. "I'm still figuring out where everything goes. They're my books. And this is a small apartment." I kept holding the box. In marriages that are still alive, there are moments where one person says something careless and the other laughs, or sighs, or says, "Let's not do this before coffee." In ours, by then, every sentence sat on the table between us like silverware laid out for the wrong meal. "I didn't know I was applying for shelf space," I said. She set the spoon down. "Why are you trying so hard to make this difficult?" That was when I understood something I should have understood years earlier. In our marriage, inconvenience was whatever forced her to acknowledge my point of view. I left the box where it was and went downstairs. Luis was in the utility closet off the lobby, crouched beside an open panel with a flashlight between his teeth and a clipboard balanced on one knee. The building smelled like pine sol and radiator heat. Somebody on the first floor was frying bacon, and the elevator doors kept opening on empty air and closing again with a tired metal shutter. "Morning," he said around the flashlight. "Morning." He pulled the light out of his mouth and looked up at me. "How's 3B treating you?" "Depends what you mean." He grinned, not picking up the warning in my tone. "Still got that sticky kitchen drawer?" I looked at him for a second too long. "How'd you know about that?" He frowned. "Every tenant in that line gets the same complaint eventually. Eleanor knew about it before she ever used it." Luis wiped his hands on a rag. "Maybe she figured it out fast." "Maybe." He stood. "Everything okay up there?" There was a time in my life when I would have answered that question the usual American male way. "Fine, getting by, just settling in." But I had Martin Kessler's tablet clip sitting behind my eyes like a burned image. "I need to ask you something," I said. Luis glanced toward the glass front doors, then back at me. "Sure. Did my wife ever live in that apartment?" He was good enough to hide the first half-second. Not good enough to hide all of it. "I don't know about live," he said. "I've only been here 8 years." How long ago was the previous owner in there? He lifted the clipboard. Depends what you call previous. Place changed hands a couple times. Louis. He shifted his weight. Mr. Mercer, I don't get involved in tenant business. Did she know the apartment before we moved in? His jaw tightened. She asked some very specific questions when you picked up the keys. What questions? The bathroom latch, the old radiator knock, whether the patch by the living room baseboard had held. He shrugged like that ended it. Some folks remember places. I stared at him. The patch. By what baseboard? He seemed to hear himself too late. Look, I'm behind on 3 service calls. He moved past me before I could stop him, leaving me in the lobby with the smell of bacon and bleach and the feeling that I had just watched a door shut in my face without ever touching the knob. Back upstairs, Eleanor was on the phone in the bedroom with the door almost closed. Not enough to be obvious. Enough to tell me she wanted the barrier, not the accusation. I stopped in the hall. No, she said softly. He hasn't said anything direct. A pause. I know where it is. Another pause. No, he won't find it if he doesn't start tearing into walls. I stood very still. Then the floorboard near the bedroom gave its little click beneath my heel. The conversation stopped. By the time I pushed the door open, Eleanor was holding the phone down at her side, screen dark. Who was that? I asked. My sister. You don't have a sister? She blinked once, then very evenly. I meant cousin. I looked at her face and felt something inside me stop trying to be generous. All right, I said. I went into the kitchen, got my keys, and walked back out before she could study me too closely. Martin Kessler lived in a ranch house in Upper Arlington with a cracked basketball hoop over the garage and a porch chair with one arm repaired in duct tape. He made coffee that tasted like it had been sitting on the burner since sunrise and spread 3 file folders across his dining room table. I should have brought this out yesterday, he said. I wasn't sure how much I should drag you into. You already dragged me in. He winced a little at that. The folders held old lease papers, repair receipts, and a property tax summary from back when he still owned Unit 3B outright. I went through them one by one. The apartment had been rented under a maiden name I recognized only after I saw the first name twice. Eleanor Whitaker. Not Mercer, not even the last name I'd known from before we married. I kept my finger on the page. She told me she looked at the place once, I said. Martin rubbed a hand over his mouth. She lived there close to a year. Who with? He looked down. A man named Daniel Rusk. That name sat there between us. Her husband? No, of course not. I looked back at the paper. There are moments when you learn something that confirms what you already feared, and instead of shock, you get a tired kind of clarity. Not relief, just the settling of one more piece into the wrong picture. What happened to him? I asked. Martin stared at the coffee in his mug. He died in that apartment. I did not move. How? They said overdose. He gave a small shake of the head. At least that's what the file said when the police were done, they said. He looked up at me then. Mr. Mercer, I was the landlord. I wasn't family, wasn't law enforcement, wasn't inside whatever mess they had. I knew there was yelling that last month. Knew there were late payments. Knew the ambulance came. After that, I wanted the place cleaned out and my name away from it. And Eleanor, she vanished for a while. Then years later she called me about the place. Asked if I still had it. Asked if the wall by the radiator had ever been opened after the patch. That brought my head up. She asked you that? She did. When? About 3 months before you signed the lease. I sat back in the chair. 3 months. Not a last-minute suggestion. Not a lucky listing. Not a tired couple wandering into a second chance. 3 months of planning, and I had been walking around thinking we found a bargain near downtown because she wanted less driving in a smaller place and maybe a chance to stop talking to each other like renters sharing a kitchen. What didn't you tell me yesterday? I asked. Martin's face went older all at once. I thought maybe it was old grief. Maybe she wanted to see it one last time. Then I saw the footage. Then I saw her on her knees by that same section of wall. Why keep quiet at all? He did not answer for a second. Because I am a coward in some very ordinary ways, he said. Because old trouble feels expensive. Because when people say a death was settled, landlords learn not to go digging unless they have to. I believed him. That did not make me like him. Back at the apartment, Eleanor had taken my father's old shop stool out of the kitchen corner and replaced it with a tall ficus in a ceramic pot. I stood in the doorway looking at the empty spot before I even set my keys down. "Where's the stool?" I asked. "In the closet." "Why?" It looked cluttered. That stool had sat in every kitchen we'd had since 2003. It wasn't pretty. Red paint peeling from the legs, one foot wrapped with gray tape where the cap had split. I used it to change bulbs and reach the top shelf and sit when my knees got stubborn. It belonged in the room the way I did, quietly, without needing a speech. I opened the hall closet. There it was, wedged behind the vacuum and a box of canned goods. The closet smelled faintly of cedar and something older, dustier, like cardboard that had been shut too long. I dragged the stool out and in doing so knocked loose a flat banker's box from the shelf above. It landed on its side and spilled a stack of folders onto the carpet. Not ours. No labels I recognized from our move. No fresh tape. These were older, the edges soft, the cardboard yellowing at the corners. I bent and picked up the top folder. Inside were receipts, utility notices, and one folded church bulletin from Street Marks Episcopal, dated 9 years back. Tucked into it was a funeral card. Daniel Rusk, born 1974, died 2017. My hand went cold. I heard Eleanor behind me before I saw her. "What are you doing?" I turned. She was standing at the end of the hall, one hand still on the wall, face gone flat in that terrible way composed people go flat when they're too surprised to arrange themselves fast enough. "These aren't ours," I said. "No. Why are they in my hall closet?" "Our hall closet," she said automatically, then seemed to hear herself and stop. I held up the card. Her eyes moved to it and back to my face. "You want to tell me why your dead man is in a box above my stepstool?" For 1 second, I thought she might actually tell the truth. Instead, she let out a breath through her nose, slow and tired, like I was an exhausting meeting that had run long. "You went through a closed box in a closet," she said. I looked at her. That was her answer. Not denial, not shock, not grief. A complaint about my access. "Who was he?" I asked. Her mouth tightened. "Someone from before." "From before what?" She did not speak. "Before me?" I said. "Before the lease. Before the ambulance." Her head lifted a fraction. "Not everything in my life began when you arrived, Calvin." That one landed clean. It was not loud. It was not clever. It was not the cruelest thing anybody had ever said to me. But it had that thin, hard precision some people use when they know exactly where another person has lived hurt for years. "Not everything in my life began when you arrived." As if I had mistaken myself for an origin, instead of what I now clearly was. A late, useful addition. A man moved into the room after the real story had already happened. I set the funeral card back into the folder very carefully. "Did you bring me here for this?" I asked. "For what?" "For him. For whatever's in these boxes, for whatever's in that wall." Her eyes changed then. Not much, but enough. It was the first time since Martin's call that I saw not annoyance, not distance, but calculation. "I don't know what Martin showed you," she said, "but if you are about to turn this into one of those jealous, late-life episodes people have when they don't know what to do with themselves, I am not going to help you." There it was. Not all the way out in the open. Just enough to let me know the road she was willing to take if she had to. Old man. Confused. Obsessive. Reading ghosts into plaster because his marriage had gone cold and his knees hurt in the morning. I looked at her, at the hall closet, at my stool half out in the carpet, and something finally burned through the last of my hesitation. Later that afternoon, when she left to pick up cleaning supplies, I took a flashlight and knelt beside the living room radiator. The patch Luis had mentioned was older paint over older plaster, a seam running low along the baseboard where the wall met the floor. You would not see it unless you were looking from knee level, which I suppose is how a man my age ends up seeing truths younger people step over. I pressed along the seam with my thumb, solid for 6 inches, then a give, barely there but real. I fetched the flathead screwdriver from the junk drawer. Not our junk drawer, not yet. Just a drawer with 2 coupons, a dead AA battery, and 1 loose takeout menu inside. I worked the edge carefully until the painted strip shifted. Dust came first, then the stale smell of shut-up wood. Behind the loosened section was a narrow cavity between studs, just enough room for an envelope. Manila, old, creased, thick with whatever time does to paper left hidden in walls. I slid it out and sat back on my heels. For a moment, I just held it. The apartment was quiet except for the refrigerator motor and somebody 2 floors down running water through old pipes. Outside the blinds, late sun was turning the opposite brick wall the color of rust. My name was not on that envelope. Nothing was. Inside was a photograph and a folded sheet of notebook paper. I looked at the photograph first. Eleanor, younger by maybe 10 years. Hair shorter, laughing at something out of frame. One arm around a man I had never seen in my life and had somehow already come to hate. They were standing in the same living room, same window, same angle of light, same ugly trim along the floor. Behind them, half visible near the doorway, was the brass key rack now hanging by my front door. There is a kind of pain that is not jealousy, and not exactly betrayal either. It is the pain of discovering you have been living inside someone else's continuation. I unfolded the paper. It was not a love letter, not a confession, just a page with times, dates, and one phone number written twice, as if copied in a hurry. At the bottom, in a different pen, 4 words. If anything happens, call. No name, no explanation, but enough to tell me this envelope had not been hidden for sentiment. It had been hidden because it mattered. I was still staring at the words when I heard the front door open. Eleanor's footsteps crossed the living room, then stopped. When I looked up, she was standing over me with a white plastic bag hanging from one hand. Paper towels, glass cleaner, a loaf of bread. Ordinary things. Her eyes dropped to the envelope, the photo, the page. She did not gasp, did not ask what I was doing, did not pretend not to understand what I had found. She only closed her eyes for a second, opened them again and said very quietly, "You shouldn't have touched that." That was the moment the whole thing changed shape for me. Not because I found the photo, not because of Daniel Rusk's name in the closet, not even because of the wall. Because in that sentence, with groceries hanging from her hand like any wife coming home at 5:30, I heard the truth without decoration. I had not been brought into that apartment to begin again. I had been brought there because a husband with a good credit score, a steady face, and a habit of minding his own business made the whole arrangement look normal, safe, respectable. I was not standing in a fresh start. I was kneeling in cover. I did not confront Eleanor that night. At 71, you learn there are moments when a man can either speak too early or speak at the right time, and the difference between those two things is usually whether anyone else is in the room. I put the photograph, the folded page, and the funeral card back into the manila envelope and slid it under a stack of my tax folders in the spare room. Then I went into the kitchen, washed 2 coffee mugs that were already clean, and asked Eleanor whether she wanted soup or sandwiches. She looked at me from across the counter for a long second. "Soup's fine," she said. That was the ugliest part of the evening. Not the lying, not the silence. The way we stood side by side in a kitchen neither of us had really earned and opened cans like a married couple who had merely had a small disagreement about shelf space. The next morning I called Martin Kessler from the parking lot before Eleanor got out of the shower. "I need you downstairs at 10, I said. He was quiet for a beat. "Downstairs where?" "In the building. Manager's office by the mailboxes." "What are you planning?" "The truth," I said, for once. Then I called Luis. He answered on the 3rd ring with the clatter of tools behind him. "Yeah? I need to see the maintenance log for the patch by the living room radiator in 3B. Silence. "That's not tenant paperwork," he said. "Then bring what you can remember." 10 o'clock. Manager's office. "Mr. Mercer, you told me about the patch. Martin told me about the camera. If either of you leaves me standing in that room alone while she turns me into an old man seeing things, I will make sure everybody in this building knows exactly how long you both let me live in the dark." He let out a slow breath through his nose. "I'll be there," he said. At 9:50, Eleanor was fastening one pearl earring at the hall mirror. "Going somewhere?" I asked. She glanced at me in the reflection. "I was thinking I'd pick up a few things." "Why?" I asked Martin and Luis to meet downstairs. Her hand stopped halfway to the 2nd earring. "For what?" "So we can stop pretending I'm the last person who ought to know what apartment I'm standing in." She turned then, slowly, and for the first time since I had known her, I saw a flicker of something unarranged cross her face. Not grief, not shame, irritation sharpened by risk. "You invited the former owner into our business?" I looked at her. Our business. That phrase might have worked 2 days earlier. Now it sounded like a costume somebody had forgotten to take off after the play ended. "At 10, I said. The manager's office was really just a square room off the lobby with one fake wood desk, a metal filing cabinet, 2 vinyl chairs, and a coffee maker that had probably been donated by somebody's church in 2008. Through the open door, you could see the row of dented brass mailboxes and the front glass doors with morning light coming through them in pale blocks. Luis got there first, holding a clipboard too tightly. Martin came in after him with a folder tucked under his arm. Mrs. Holloway from 2A was already at the mailboxes with her cart and pretended not to notice any of us, which meant she noticed everything. Eleanor arrived last. She stepped into the office wearing a navy cardigan and that calm, smooth face she used when she wanted a room to arrange itself around her. She looked at Martin, then Luis, then at me. "This is absurd," she said. I was sitting in the chair by the desk. Not standing, not pacing. Just sitting there with the envelope, the photograph, and my phone in front of me. "Close the door," I said. She did not move. Luis did it instead. For a second, nobody spoke. Then Eleanor gave a short, humorless smile. "So what is this exactly?" she asked. "An intervention?" Martin looked down at the floor. "It's the first honest meeting this apartment has had in years," I said. Her eyes shifted to the envelope. I saw her recognize it, and that alone gave me more strength than anger would have. "You went through my things," she said. "No," I said. "I found the things you hid in my wall." Luis's head lifted. Martin looked at Eleanor and then quickly away again. She folded her arms. "Calvin has been upset since Mr. Kessler decided to show him some invasive, out-of-context footage. I don't know what story he's telling himself, but I'd prefer not to participate in this kind of paranoia." There it was, smooth, reasonable, built to sound embarrassed on my behalf. Mrs. Holloway stopped sorting her mail. I nodded once. "All right." I took out the photograph first and laid it on the desk between us. Eleanor did not touch it. Martin did not need to ask who the man was. Luis looked from the younger face in the picture to Eleanor standing in front of him now and lost some color. "That's Unit 3B, I said. "Same window, same trim, same brass key rack that's hanging by my front door." Eleanor said nothing. I set down the folded maintenance slip Martin had brought. Luis stared at it before I even turned it toward him. "Read the line halfway down," I said. He swallowed. "Baseboard section near radiator removed and reset following wall cavity inspection." "Date?" I asked. He read it. 9 days before Daniel Rusk died. Martin shut his eyes briefly. Eleanor finally spoke. "You are taking scraps of old paperwork and a photograph and building some grotesque fantasy because you can't handle the fact that people had lives before they met you." I stood then, slow, careful. "Don't do that," I said. "Do what?" "Talk to me like I'm some lonely old fool clinging to a ghost story because my marriage disappointed me." The room went still, her mouth pressed thin, but she held her ground. "Then stop acting like one." That landed in front of witnesses, just the way she meant it to. For a second I felt the room tilt toward her again, toward the younger, composed woman with the steadier face, toward the familiar public temptation to believe a calm liar over a wounded man. Then Martin spoke. "She called me in January," he said, voice rough. "Asked whether the old living room camera had covered the radiator wall." Eleanor snapped her head toward him. He kept going. Then again in March. Asked if I'd ever thrown out anything left behind after Daniel died. Luis stared at her now, not me. I took out my phone. "This came from the envelope," I said, and placed the folded notebook page on the desk. Phone number written twice. "If anything happens, call." Eleanor's face had changed. Not much, but enough. The control was no longer sitting naturally on her. "You can't prove anything with that," she said. "No," I said. "Not with that." I tapped the screen of my phone and set it on the desk between us. When Martin gave me Daniel's old file, there was also a number for the responding patrol officer. He's retired in Grove City now. He remembered that the phone they logged from the apartment had one saved voicemail that wasn't included in the final report because it came in after the body was removed and the scene was already being closed. Martin still had the backup from the old tenant property box. Martin looked sick. I should have gone to the police years ago. Yes, I said without looking at him. Then I pressed play. There was some static first, then a man's voice, weak and breathless and trying hard not to sound afraid. Ellie, pick up. I know you're out there. I know you can hear me. Nobody in that room moved. On the recording he coughed, then kept going. Please, if you're leaving, fine. Just call. Don't do this because you're mad. Just call somebody. The sound of breathing. Then one final effort, frayed and urgent. If anything happens, call. That was all. No dramatic confession. No perfect legal bombshell. Just a dying man who knew she was near enough to help and cold enough not to. When the message ended, the room had changed in the plainest way possible. Nobody was looking at me like I might be unstable. Nobody was looking at Eleanor for the next explanation either. Mrs. Holloway had come fully to the doorway without any pretense now. Louise had gone gray around the mouth. Martin was staring at his own shoes like they had personally accused him. Eleanor was the only one still upright in the old way, but even that was thinning. That doesn't prove, she began. It proves enough, I said. She looked at me then with something close to hatred, but stripped of superiority now. I leaned one hand on the desk. You brought me into this building with my boxes and my name and my money because a husband makes everything look respectable, I said. You let me carry my life into a room that belonged to your lie before it ever belonged to us. Then, when I saw the edge of it, you were ready to make me sound confused. She did not answer. That silence was the first honest thing she had given me in years. Luis cleared his throat. I need to call the property manager, Martin said without lifting his head. I'll call the detective bureau myself. Mrs. Holloway looked at Eleanor with the kind of quiet disgust older women save for moments they know will travel through a building before supper. I gathered the photograph, the page, and the envelope back into one stack, not to protect her, to protect the order of the truth. Then I picked up the spare key from the desk, where Louise had set it earlier that morning for some reason I no longer cared about. The laminated tag still read E. Mercer. I peeled it off, tore it once down the middle, and dropped the plastic pieces into the wastebasket beside the filing cabinet. No one said a word. When I went back upstairs, the apartment looked smaller than it had the day before. Or maybe I had finally stopped lending it hope. I took my father's stool out of the closet and set it back in its place by the kitchen wall. I brought my boxes of books out of the spare room and stacked them beside the window. Then I walked to the front door, lifted Eleanor's brass key rack off the hook screws, and laid it face down on the counter. By dawn the next morning, the sky beyond the blinds had gone from black to soft blue-gray. Hallway voices drifted in and out, doors opening. Somebody leaving for work, the faint roll of a laundry cart over the corridor carpet. I stood at the kitchen counter with the apartment key in one hand and my wedding band in the other. The counter was cool beneath my fingers. The room smelled like old coffee and drywall dust and the loaf of bread Eleanor had brought home when she still thought groceries could pass for ordinary life. I set the key down first, then the ring beside it. Not slammed, not thrown, just placed there carefully, like a man putting away something he had finally understood the weight of. When I walked out, I took my coat from the back of the couch. I did not need her permission to hang it anywhere anymore.